Hey guys, it's Mandals here to ask which already existing Pokemon should get new variations in Pokemon Sun and Moon's Alola region. If you're not up to date on Pokemon Sun and Moon announcements, it was recently announced that Pokemon would be getting new Alolan forms. Alola form meaning Pokemon that already exist have been exposed to the Alolan environment, thus changing their appearance, type, etc. So, what do I think of this new feature? Well, I love it actually. It's probably the greatest news we've received for Pokemon Sun and Moon so far, in my opinion. Pokemon that adapt to their environment, now that is evolution. No, forget everything you know about this. Pokemon has incorporated actual evolution into their games, and that's pretty freaking neat. For example, a population of Vulpix get too close to a snowy summit. Now they're ice types and look like this. That being said, a lot of people are discussing possible entries that Game Freak might add to Sun and Moon, and I too am going to join in on the fun. And like I said, a ton of people are talking about this topic right now, so if I talk about a Pokemon that someone has already brought up, or has already thought of, I'm sorry, I'm just one guy. I like to think that all of these ideas came straight from my head with no outside influence, so try to remember that. Well, I've talked about pretty much everything I need to talk about, and now we can roll the video.
Number 10, the Hydreigon Evolution line. Hydreigon is a Pokemon that was a terrible threat in Generation 5 and became feared by boatloads of trainers. That is until Gen 6 rolled around and introduced fairy types. I think a really cool way to make Hydreigon relevant again while also adding variety to the Alolan environment would be to give these three an Alolan variation. And if it were up to me, the new variations would make the trio Fire Dragon type. This is for a few reasons. Firstly, it would make sense in Alola given the amount of volcanoes in Hawaii. These Pokemon would inhabit these volcanoes, thus adopting them into the previously mentioned type. Next, come on, let's get real here. That type combo would simply be awesome. It's kinda bizarre that there are practically no dragons that are Fire Dragon, given that fire breathing is a staple feature for dragons to have. Dino, or Dino, even almost looks like it was once a fire type. These holes, or whatever they are, almost look like they should be emitting steam or magma. And the design around its neck looks like a fire design would go nicely with it. Zweilous looks like it should be breathing fire, and come on, a fire hydra? That's a concept you simply cannot beat. Number 9, Skarmory. When I first heard of the idea of Alolan forms, the concept of Alola Skarmory is actually one of the first things I thought of. Okay, it may not have been Skarmory specifically, but I thought it would be neat if there were flying Pokemon that had adapted to flying too close to lightning during thunderstorms. Another fun fact about Hawaii, it rains a lot there. Thus, there are going to be thunderstorms. Imagine that the local Skarmory were conducting the electricity since they're made of metal, and instead of taking lethal damage from this, became an electric steel type to better survive this situation. Skarmory's design is practically begging for this to happen. Look at how jagged and spiky the Pokemon is. Thunderbolts are traditionally drawn as also jagged and spiky. Also, to avoid that quad weakness to ground type, I would suggest that Alola Skarmory gets the Levitate ability. Also, I would change Skarmory's kit to make it more of a sweeper by lowering its overall defense and slightly raising its attack and speed. That way, trainers won't only settle on this form and standard Skarmory would also still be viable. It's hard for me to say exactly how broken this Pokemon would be, but one thing's for sure, it would be really awesome. Number 8, the Eelektross Evolution line. The first time I laid eyes upon Eelektross and the gang, you know what I thought of? Those freaky deep-sea creatures that are only found in the deepest, darkest trenches of the ocean. It got me thinking, what if there was a subspecies of Eelektross that were adapted to living in underwater abyssal environments? I for one fell in love with the idea. I fell in love even further when I found out that that would mean that these Pokemon would become electric dark type. I know that it'd be a water-dwelling Pokemon without being part water type, but I just find electric dark to be too good to pass up. Appearance-wise, Eelektross's top fin would definitely need to more closely resemble an anglerfish angler. Being abyssal, it would also have a rainbowy light-up appearance in order to attract its prey in the pitch dark, much like most abyssal sea creatures. Eelektross's current ability, Levitate, would work fine, but Arena Trap would also make sense since the Pokemon uses its bioluminescence abilities to lure in prey. And overall, not much else would need to change. These three having an abyssal form would just be very cool to look at. Number 7, Seviper. Seviper is a pretty unpopular Pokemon, and honestly, I'm not even sure why the Pokemon crossed my mind when thinking of ideas for this video. However, I'm really glad it did because I've got some sweet features that would make Seviper a really neat Alolan inhabitant. Assuming Game Freak doesn't have any foreseeable plans for a rattlesnake Pokemon, I suggest that Alolan Seviper should take the form of a rattlesnake. Hawaii, if you're unaware, is home to practically any kind of environment that you can think of, and this isn't limited to deserts. If Alola contains any sort of desert, I say we dump a bunch of Seviper into it and let nature take its course. Along with Seviper Seviper's tail losing its blade appearance in place of a Rattler, I think ground poison would better suit the Pokemon as well. Naturally, I also believe the Pokemon should hold more of a brown color scheme to fit the desert environment. Lastly, Seviper is a pretty bad battler, and the idea I'm about to present might be horribly broken, but screw it, I'm saying it anyways. Alola Seviper should have an ability called Sidewind, granting priority to all physical attacks. Like I said, yeah, this could be broken, but I'd very much like to see this put into practice. Number 6, the Togekiss evolution line. This entry is one that I found initially odd, but the more I thought about it, the more I fell in love with the idea. You all know Togepi, Togetic, and Togekiss are these cute and almost angelic looking fairy types. However, what if we took the flip side of this and made the trio more closely resemble demonic imps and or devils? If you're not familiar, an imp is a small, mischievous mythical creature that is usually portrayed as hellish and wielding demonic wings. They're even actually kind of cute in some portrayals, which is perfect for Togepi and Togetic. Starting off, Togepi would have the classic devil tail and look much darker in appearance. The Pokemon would also be Fairy Fire type. Fairy since it's based off of a mythical creature, and Fire since it's demonic. Togetic I feel would look way more imp-like since it has wings. Togekiss would have its cute fluffy wings replaced with huge demonic ones and look like it came straight out of Doom. Okay, it wouldn't be that terrifying, but you get the picture. And finally, Prankster would be a great ability since imps are so mischievous by nature. So long as Game Freak didn't get too carried away with the design, I think a demonic Togekiss line would be great. Number 5, the Crobat evolution line. Bats in real life are some of the most diverse organisms on this entire planet, which really got me thinking about an Alolan Zubat, Golbat, and Crobat. I began to wonder what would become of the trio if they lived their entire lives in caves, never getting a smidge of sunlight in their daily routine. The result of this absolute darkness Crobat would be a much more sinister look, as well as a type change from poison flying to dark poison. I suppose dark flying would make a bit more sense, but I don't know, dark poison feels a little more badass. Regardless of the type combination, it would make an awesome evolution line. I even thought up of a new ability for these guys to have called Vampiric Leech. This ability would cause moves that have secondary effects to lose that effect, but in return heal the user for half of the damage dealt to the opponent. This means moves such as Shadow Ball, Dark Pulse, and Cross Poison would now heal Crobat as if he was using Giga Drain. On paper, I love this idea, but I'm unsure of how game-breaking it would be when put into practice. Regardless, I need an Alolan Zubat, Golbat, and Crobat in my life. Number 4, the Conkeldurr evolution line. Love him or hate him, Conkeldurr is a crazy powerful, threatening Pokemon, and I for one am definitely one of the people who are leaning towards loving the big guy. The idea of a fighting type that is so tough it decides to carry around concrete columns is a concept that is, well...
metal as dude.
But it also raises a question. What would become of these three Pokemon if they didn't grow around urban city areas? After all, Girder is holding, well, a metal girder, and last time I checked, those aren't commonly found in nature. So let's brainstorm. What if these dudes grew up in the jungle/forest areas of Alola? The idea of this excites me since I feel as though Conkeldurr would look like a Norse giant upon being exposed to these conditions. Replace the concrete columns with trees and give the guy a long, scraggly beard and you've got yourself one menacing forest troll. Furthermore, Girder would instead be holding a large boulder and for timber a small log or moss-covered plank. This would also make the trio grass fighting or fairy fighting instead. I know Norse mythology was kind of X and Y's thing, but I still would really like to see an Alolan Conkeldurr. Number 3, the Blaziken evolution line. Blaziken has really received a lot of special treatment in recent time. It was the first and one of the only starter Pokemon to receive a Mega Evolution, as well as one of the few to make it into Pokken tournaments. So as much as I kinda hate to do the Pokemon more favors, I'm going to anyways because I love the idea for an Alolan Blaziken. For starters, let's talk about chickens. After all, it is the animal that these three Pokemon are modeled after. However, Blaziken doesn't look that chicken-like, does he? I want to believe that that's because of the environmental conditions of Hoenn. In Alola, however, Torchic, Combusken, and Blaziken have more feathers, a more prominent beak, and are just overall more avian-looking. This being the case, Torchic would be a pure flying type, and Combusken and Blaziken flying fighting types. I would even go as far to say that Blaziken would have full-blown wings, giving it the ability to actually fly. These Pokemon being more chicken-like even has real-world applications as Hawaii is filled to the brim with wild chickens. And more importantly, Blaziken would be able to zip through the sky. Number 2, the Garchomp evolution line. Unfortunately, I know for a fact that this entry has been talked about. However, I did think of it before watching anyone else's stuff, and I still have some of my own ideas about this form regardless. Anyways, Garchomp and the rest of the gang would look amazing as actual water-dwelling sharks rather than land sharks. I know that kinda defeats the purpose of a land shark, but let's just think about this for a second. If these Pokemon migrated to land due to evolution, then they must have started somewhere. That somewhere, my friends, is the tropical Alolan waters. The Garchomp in this neck of the woods would not have legs, and rather a more pronounced tail fin. Their arms would also be less long in order to more closely resemble fins. This would also change their types from ground dragon to water dragon, since they would be in the ocean after all. Also, I want to take this a step further and say that it'd be cool to model these Pokemon after a tiger shark, a common animal in Hawaii. A swimming striped Garchomp would be a glorious sight, and I demand we see it, Game Freak! Number 1, the Golurk evolution line. Okay, I will admit, for this entry, I am a little bit biased. I love this big lug and everything about him. I love that we essentially have an Iron Giant Pokemon, and I love that it can soar around and use Fly without giving a f***. But even if you're not a fan of Golurk at the moment, I'm pretty sure every one of you will love the Pokemon once I pitch this idea for an Alolan form. Referring back to Hawaiian culture, I'm sure that more than a select few of you could recognize the Tiki. You know, humanoid wooden statues that are culturally popular amongst these islands. Similarly, according to the handy-dandy Pokedex, Golurk were crafted by ancient people, but instead using clay. I for one would like to think that the ancient Hawaiians modeled their own iterations of Golurk, and something along the lines of this would be the product. It's still the hulking giant that we know and love, but comes equipped with traditional Tiki carvings and kick-ass Tiki flames. All I would add now to put some icing on the cake would be to change Alolan Golurk's type to Grass Ghost. Ground Ghost made sense when the Pokemon was made out of clay, but being made out of wood, Grass type just feels much more fitting. Well, that's the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter and Twitch if you want to be up to date with my latest posts and updates. Also, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and hey, I've got lots more similar videos if you're interested. That'll do it for now, guys, and until next time, peace.